Hello guys and welcome back to this video. So today we are going to talk about deja vu, and not only about that but also about insomnia, creative insomnia, and then the third part of this video will be dedicated to serial killers. Yes, there is a connection here, right? An important one between serial killers and insomnia. So serial killers, we're going to talk about those ones only that have claimed to suffer from insomnia and might have judged, innocent or guilty. Anyway, let's start with deja vu because that's our main point right now. So when we talk about deja vu, right, we talk about so many different theories that can explain why we're having a deja vu. And so many theories correspond very often to nothing at all. And so let's start off from the first, most recent research that happened in Catanzaro, Italy, where MRI images of epileptic patients and patients with deja vu were actually compared. Now, in epileptic sort of patients, there has been seen an anomaly of the visual cortex. So, normal patients without epilepsy, right, they don't manifest an anomaly of the visual cortex, but when they're experiencing a deja vu, there is a change in the transmission of the information that go to the limbic system that regulates emotions. So what they found out was that in epileptics, right, there was an anomaly of the visual cortex. Whereas in normal patients without epilepsy, but just patients that were experiencing a deja vu, there was a change in transmission to the limbic system that regulates emotions. In particular, the result of this change is that there is a memory that never existed as such, that is perceived as real. So an experience gets perceived by the brain as if had already happened in our lives. Yet, in this theory, there has to be something that our brain already knows, right? An experience that has already been sort of experienced so that the brain can kind of recognize it and then perceive it as already happened. And in a certain sense, this is the one of the theory, not just the theory, but one of the theories that are the backdrop for an explanation, a possible explanation of deja vu experiences, because it is believed, according to this theory, that is called the split perception, that our brain records minimal events, features, traits, minimum sort of details of something, right? But doesn't really have a very clear memory about it. But what happens is that once something else that happens, very far in the future, triggers those memories, those little details, at that point our brain registers the new experiences as something that has already happened, something that was there already before, and therefore we have the experience of a deja vu. So then, according to this theory, what we have, theory of split perception, what we have is that we have registered some details, but in a non-conscious way, whereas the second time we are more aware, and that is how our brain tries to reconnect the pieces, right? Let's go then to the second theory. The second theory says that we have glitches in the memory system. Now, this is not a surprise, and this is not alarming by any measure and to any extent, because simply memory, we know, works in a very complicated fashion, right? Now, there are a bunch of several ways in which these glitches can happen. First, for instance, is because an experience doesn't go first in the short memory and then it does not sediment in the long memory term, but might go directly to the long memory term, right? And so what this theory says is that the first time our brain witnesses and registers something is not conscious, whereas the second we are much more aware of it, right? And so that allows us to have this sort of like split perception. Then the second theory says that there are glitches in the system of our memory, right? Now, this is not by any measure alarming, because it might be perceived just as normal system malfunctioning, sort of like issues that can pop up. So it is possible to conceive that an experience that creates a memory doesn't go directly into the short-term memory, but goes, and then to the long term, but goes first to the long-term memory kind of container of our brain, and that would create the perception that we have already experienced such and such, reason why we'll end up having a deja vu. Second possible interpretation is that we actually have two pathways, right? But when information does not proceed the way it is supposed to, and one piece of information reaches about the same experience, reaches its destination first, so to speak, right? Then in that case, we'll have some sort of glitches in the system, reason why we'll have a deja vu. What anyway seems very, very clear from what we have said so far is basically that deja vu are connected with the memory and memory issues or possible issues in the system or that concerns our memory. So the fact that we connected to our memory might be corroborated by another fact, that is that deja vus are much more likely to be experienced when our brain is very active. So in other words, when we are young and when our brain is constantly under stress because allegedly we learn from experiences, from textbooks and whatnot, right? Whereas the number of deja vus tend to decrease when we reach an older age. With that being said, there is a third theory, as anticipated at the beginning, a third theory through which we can interpret the presence and the existence of deja vus that has been elaborated by Akira O'Connor. And I think she said that deja vus appear when our memory is running memory checks on the system and about the system, right? So when, in other words, something is detected that is not as it is supposed to be, right? And it's our memory itself that is checking its own status, so to speak. In reality, though, we must say that there is a bunch of different reasons why we can experience a deja vu. A deja vu can be just a deja vu, can be an epileptic seizure of focal type, where we would experience a bunch of other symptoms, such as a rash of emotions, spasms, so movements that we're not able to control and to calm down, twitching of our eyes, and etc., right? And so these ones would be different and would be also acknowledged and experienced as different than a mere deja vu. We also know that in patients suffering from dementia, deja vu might appear as a fake memory that is created to cover a hole, like a hole in our memory, right? We do know, we are well aware that there is a whole side, a whole hemisphere of our brain that works to create stories, right? And these stories might end up being very paradoxical or might be completely contradictory, but we have engraved in our brain the urge to make sense, and even if that means to create a very confabulatory story about what is and what is not, we would tend to do that regardless, and therefore we might provoke the appearance, insurgence of deja vus. So we finished off the first section that was completely entirely dedicated to deja vus, and now we could go to the second part of this video, which is creative insomnia, right? We do know that creativity is highly associated and highly to be associated with insomnia. There are much more transmissions in those hours when we are supposed to rest, because the neurotransmissions at this point is better. It is able to connect more and more elements, especially when we are in a state of anxiety or depression. At the same time, we understand that this is extremely dangerous. Dangerous, especially when it's protracted for a considerable amount of time, right? Because we do know it amplifies those perceptions, and basically we put under stress our brain, and we impart the command to our brain that it has to work more and better, right? Now, talking about creative insomnia, we go first to Leo Kretzner. When his husband died in a car crash, he started painting. He started painting voraciously, right? He locked himself in the studio that was of his husband, so Jackson Pollock, and he started to create paintings that now are part of the Night Journey series, right? We also know that the French writer Marcel Proust, wrote in the early hours of the mornings. In other words, he was taking advantage of the liminal state by in which you can have better connections, better fantasy, better understanding, and also some sort of very developed imagination. And in those hours, he wrote In Search of Lost Time. And we also know another guy that became extremely famous as a painter, Dali. He slept all night on a chair, right? It was probably also having lucid dreams, which is a whole different topic in itself. But we do know that that contributed highly to his artistic creation. And finally, we can mention Otto Lewi, who won the Nobel Prize because he was able to figure out how the transmissions were working in our brain, and he did that again in that period of time in which we all are supposed to sleep. And it was indeed this sort of combination between the profession of sleep and creativity that was investigated by Pierre Eugenie, and he exposed images of the brain through lab prints, and they manifest. They actually show how the brain reacts to connections, images, and thoughts, right? And so that was very important for us to understand. But again, even this wasn't exactly completely new, because we know very well the experiences that Van Gogh had about it, right? And so Van Gogh was completely devastated by deprivation of sleep, right? So it's important to say here that he produced probably his majority of his hard work in that kind of state, but also he would use camphor to sleep, and camphor wasn't even effective at all in his case. Let's then go ahead with our third section of the video, which is about insomnia. And specifically, it's not in general about insomnia, but it is more in particular in reference, and we are going to deal with killers during insomnia, right? So insomnia is not necessarily such a dangerous state. We all suspect that children will become at a certain point suffering from insomnia, because insomnia has to do with the growth hormone. But with that being said, there have been some cases, some historical cases, where killers have killed, and then they have claimed themselves to be innocent because they were insomniacs. The first case that we're going to mention today is Massachusetts versus Tyrrell. It's a case that can be traced back to 1846, and it is the case of a man that cuts the throat, basically, of a prostitute, and then sets on fire the brothel where she was working. He also fled to New Orleans, but then he was caught by the police, underwent trial, and was reckoned to be innocent. He said that he was sleepwalking, and he had been a sleepwalker for basically his entire life, and that was enough. And obviously he had to prove it, but that was apparently enough for him to get away with murder. Same thing happened to another sleepwalker, meaning we have another case. This time we are in Canada. That happened in 1986 with Regina versus Parks, and it is the case, very well-known case, famous case, that of Regina versus Parks. The case is about Kenneth Parks. It is this Canadian man, married. He had recently had a daughter, and he has some financial issues, specifically because he gambles, and so he has accumulated some sort of debt. Um, the next morning, they have a meeting with the entire family and with the parents-in-law. But the night before this meeting, what happens is that he wakes up at night, drives 14 miles, and then gets to his in-laws house. And there he actually killed his mother-in-law, and then tried to strangle, and managed to strangle, but it didn't manage to kill his father-in-law. We also know that he used a rope, that is the cable for the iron, and a knife. We also know that he went to his sister-in-law room where she was sleeping, but didn't touch really her. And so she didn't realize what had happened until the next morning. We also have to mention here that Kenneth Parks had a history as a sleepwalker that was well documented in court. And we also have to mention that during the fight that had happened that night, he cut his tendons. Now, only that is alleged to procure a type of pain that is atrocious. But he didn't feel anything, then went straight to the police. And then once he was at the police, he basically told a very confusing story, and he didn't realize that he was in pain. He didn't realize the blood he had on his shirt, on his hands, and was very in a state that is pretty much a confusional state. And then he was acquitted, so found innocent. The next case we are discussing here is that of Michael Rixenberg's. We are in 1994. He was sentenced to serve the rest of his life in prison because even though he claimed he was sleepwalking, he actually killed his wife. Now, the understanding here is that basically his wife was about to leave him, right? And that was a major factor for the jury to sentence him. 1997 is another important here, where we have Arizona versus Fallader. Now, the neighbor this time called the police because he heard noises, and he also saw something while Fallader was around the swimming pool. We know that Fallader killed his wife with 44 stab wounds. He held her head underwater, attempted to throw away all the bloody items, and therefore the reason that he was sleepwalking doesn't really hold water, as we say. And finally, we get to the last case. The last case is California versus Fritz. This time around, we're talking about two lovers. He was married with somebody else. She was married with somebody else. He took her on a getaway holiday to Catalina. So they were actually in Catalina, and they were on a ship. Here, apparently, he smashed a flower pot on her head, and there were evidence of violence. Evidence of violence that was prior to that fatal and the last instant. But then there were evidence also that the body was murdered, that he had damaged the body and the face, probably to slow down the process of recognition of the woman. But there were also evidence of prior violence and abuse perpetrated against her. The end of this is that naturally Fritz was also sentenced and was found guilty. Now, with that being said, we're done for this video, guys. So now it's your turn. Please comment. Please let me know what you think, what you believe, what you make out of all the 3 sections we have discussed today. Don't forget to comment then, subscribe to the channel, comment below, hit the notification bell if you want to receive new updates, like the video if you have liked the video and to support me and this channel, and we'll talk some more next time with a new different topic. With that being said, guys, that's it. Bye bye.